All right, we are live on YouTube and I'm going to let everybody in. See who's here. Good evening, everyone. This is the Montgomery County Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall. We're just getting started, so just letting you in the door takes a few minutes, but welcome everyone. Good evening. If you're just joining, this is the Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall. On Zoom takes a couple of minutes to let people in. They're just opening the door. So if you're looking for the Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall, you found the right place. We'll give it a couple of minutes. This is the Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall. Still waiting, letting a few people in, coming in a few at a time. We'll be with you shortly. Thank you for joining. Okay, I guess we'll get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Losak. I'm co-founder and executive director of the Montgomery County Renters Alliance. Tonight, we're going to have a perhaps short, but certainly sweet and focused conversation on the status of the COVID rent relief program and an opportunity for you all to get an overview of what's happening at the Department of Housing and Community Affairs in terms of resources for you, and then an opportunity for questions, answers, and any concerns you might have. We ask that all of your questions and concerns be put in the chat, and we will get to them as best we can. We will end no later than 8:30, but it's a possibility, depending on how we go, that we might get done earlier than that. So let me quickly introduce a few people. We have my staff, which is Malek Demir, and then we have Pat Beckham and Dave Mullins, who is juggling children and his duties. And our esteemed panelist tonight is the Deputy Director of the Department of Housing and Community Affairs, Frank Demaray. Let me open up with a few remarks about where we are and some news that happened in the last week or so. For those of you who received our newsletter, and if you have not and are just new to us, you will begin receiving it after this Renter Town Hall. We take everybody's emails, put them in the database, and you'll get our newsletters down the road. If you are new to us, you should know that we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We are the first and only regional nonprofit in our region that is dedicated exclusively to renter outreach, organizing, education, and advocacy. And we were founded in 2010, quite a while ago. So I don't know if you all heard, but the governor did veto two important bills that will affect many renters in our area. One was Senate Bill 384, which had a companion to House Bill 7003, I think, which with the lead sponsor was Delegate Vaughn Stewart, who was on the board of the Montgomery County Renters Alliance. And that bill, had the governor signed it or allowed it to pass, would have given judges the opportunity to continue cases if the renter were awaiting in good faith their application for COVID rent relief to be processed. Unfortunately, the governor disagreed with that and vetoed it, but it will mean that if you have not received your rent relief and you are in court or facing eviction, there'll be no opportunity for the judge to continue the case, at least not by law. We do urge you, though, and Mr. Desmarais will get into this later, if you are facing eviction or escalating towards eviction, and let me just remind you, first you might get a threat. Second, you might get, some notice from the landlord, the property manager's lawyers. Then you'll get a 10-day notice of summary ejectment. That's a notice from the court that the landlord by law has to give you that says in 10 days they're going to file with the court to have you evicted for failure to pay rent. And then once they file with the court, you'll get a court summons with a court date, and you must go to court. You have to go to court. If you do, you have absolutely no defense, even if you're right. After the court date, if you have a judgment against you, which you will if you haven't paid your rent, then the landlord will have to fill out something called a writ of restitution, which is a simple form, says that they want to take possession of your apartment. And then that writ of restitution will be a notice sent to the sheriff's office to schedule your eviction. If at any time when you receive a court summons, the writ of restitution, or a notice from the sheriff's office on your door, which is a red and white, very bold poster that they put on your door, each one of those points, if you've applied for COVID rent relief, you need to inform the Department of Health and Human Services COVID rent relief program that you've received these summonses and that your eviction is becoming more serious and more imminent. And you do that by emailing them at HSS at Montgomery County. I'm putting it in the chat for you. Montgomery, come on, fingers. Montgomery County MD.gov. HSS at Montgomery County MD.gov. If you think that things are getting more serious and you've got an application that's pending, the COVID rent relief program folks have told us that they will prioritize people who are facing imminent eviction if you've applied, and of course, if you're eligible for the program. So the governor did veto that bill that allows the courts to give a continuance. So that is unfortunate. Another bill that was also vetoed by the governor was Senate Bill 563. And that bill would have made it illegal for landlords who are not licensed, not following the law, to take their tenants to court for eviction, because one would expect that they are supposed to operate in good faith and within the law before they can use the law against their tenants. Unfortunately, the governor disagreed with that and vetoed that as well. So these are two bills that we will work on, and well, hopefully we won't need COVID rent relief in the future, but if we do, we will work on seeing if that bill could be passed at the next session. And the same thing with the licensing bill. Very, very important bills, very common sense bills, but unfortunately they didn't pass. We are all deeply concerned that the lifting of the COVID emergency, COVID rent stabilization law that was lifted May 15th may very well result in a spike in rents around our region. We're already seeing rent increases, between 5% and 30% in some areas. We would like to see examples of these increases. If you're receiving after May 15th a notice of renewal that includes, a very high rent increase, we'd like to see a copy of that so that we can begin thinking about how to encourage the council and the executive to move forward on some form of anti-gouging legislation. County Executive Elrich has begun pondering putting forward some of this legislation, and it would be helpful that if and when they get to the point of proposing such legislation, that we have examples of why the legislation is so needed. The Renters Alliance is on the beat these days in a big way. We've had a very, very busy spring. We were out at Cider Mill for our annual community picnic and outreach event. We had about 500 people stream through over the course of the 90-degree day, cooking hamburgers and hot dogs and passing out information and passing out. Actually, nobody passed out, but we thought we might. It was very successful, but we'd like to do this in your community. If you've got a apartment community that would like to form a tenants association that has issues that you'd like to have just a community meeting with us, or you'd like to in some way deal individually with us with a personal issue having to do with your landlord or your property manager, we're here to help in any of those ways, and so is our staff. You can contact us at info@rentersalliance.org if Malek or Dave or Pat would put that in the chat, and let us know. We are definitely trying to get out in the field as much as possible. We had our hands tied like everybody else during this terrible pandemic. We used to be able to have community meetings in apartment buildings in person, and we had to clamp down on that. Then we got this Zoom thing going, and some of us old-fangled people probably have been figuring it out. We're doing better at it, but there's still nothing like having meetings in person where we can, outdoor community events. If you've got some kind of a picnic or community event going on where we can provide a table of information, we'd be happy to come and offer you information about what the Renters Alliance does, county information about resources that are available to you, and also just be there to counsel and educate you on your rights and responsibilities. So, just keep that in mind. That's what the Renters Alliance does. And as I mentioned before, we are always working on improving policy and legislation that affects renters. We've still got a long way to go in the state of Maryland. Renters are still very vulnerable in many ways, including not having the protection of a non-renewal. Right now, a landlord can decide not to renew your lease with just 60 days notice, and there's very little defense against that. One of our board members, Delegate Janelle Wilkins, has put forward over 3 years now legislation to establish just cause eviction law. That law requires a landlord to justify not renewing a lease. Absent that justification, your lease would automatically renew. That law, that common protection, exists in places like Washington, D.C., New York, New Jersey, Seattle, San Francisco, all kinds of places that have had longstanding renter communities. Unfortunately, Maryland, with the exception of Baltimore, is still very behind in terms of renter legal infrastructure. The renter population in the state has grown dramatically in the last few decades, and yet we have a long way to go to catch up on protecting those residents. So that's an area we're working in, and if you'd like to get involved in helping us to improve your legal protections, as well as improving services to you from the county or the state, then by all means get involved. And the last thing I'll say, since my proud staff is wearing their buttons, but let's see if I can hold it. There we are. If you want an I'm a renter and I vote button, email us your name and address, and we will send 1 or 10 if you want. We got plenty. But we want to make sure that one of the reasons why the Renters Alliance came into existence, and County Executive Ike Leggett said this in the State of the County address, that one of the purposes of the Renters Alliance was to provide, for the first time, an organized voice for renters in public affairs. That if we want to see changes and we want to see protections and we want to be recognized and respected as residents of this county, then you have to participate in the election process. We're a 501c nonprofit. We take no position on party or candidates, but we do expect renters to vote. So, and if you do vote, we'd love you to be wearing a button that says I'm a renter and I vote. So let us know, and we're happy to send you some. And by wearing them, you help other renters or remind them how important this is. So with that, I've been talking a lot. I will again remind you, put your questions and concerns in the chat. My staff, Pat Beckham, Malik Demir, and Dave Mullins will be monitoring, as will I. But for now, let me turn it to the Deputy Director of the Department of Housing and Community Affairs, who has been point not only with DHCA, but with Health and Human Services COVID Rent Relief Program, because they intersect, of course. And he can give us an update on the status of that program, and then also hopefully some information about what resources are available at DHCA to help renters, and any other information he thinks is important. Frank.
Sure. Thank you very much, Matt, and good evening. Start with a thank you for everybody that's attending. We know that you're here because you have concerns and questions, and hopefully we can answer some of them this evening. But fundamentally, we can't answer all of them. We're going to give you links in the chat. We'll speak to those links for those that can't see the chat. It's a lot of information on the county websites. There's information through Renters Alliance. There's other we call support organizations, and we have the county's resources. So everything we're talking about tonight with respect to the county, you can call the county using the general information 311. It's important to be as specific as you can about what the issue is you're calling about. A service request is generated. It gets referred to an appropriate party in the county. So you don't have to know who to call. Just call 311, and I'll kind of repeat some of the other contacts. So first thing we want to talk about is we recognize that this pandemic is continuing, not just health, which is very concerning at this point, continuing, but it's also continuing in the damage it's done to finances, to households, and to employment. We recognize the need to continue as much support as we can. So the county has distributed over $78 million of rent assistance with 3 rounds prior to the current round. We're in the 4th round of assistance for rental arrearages. The program was reactivated on May the 16th. It's called COVID Rent Relief. I added to the chat the link to the Department of Health and Human Services for the COVID Rent Relief main page. Again, you can search Montgomery County MD. It's important to get Maryland because there's many Montgomery counties across the country. So, and then just put in COVID Rent Relief. This is a continuation of the program approach. It's federal money, so it's directed and controlled by the federal guidelines, directed to those who've been impacted by COVID and directed to those who are lower income. The guidelines and eligibility are at that website. I'll just highlight them here. But as you consider whether you're eligible and as you go through the application process, it's going to be important to understand that this application window is from the 16th of May through the 30th of June. It's a 45-day window. Previously, we had it open-ended, and when we got to the point where applications are coming in that we felt we're going to exhaust the then available funds, we set a closure date. With this round, we expect that we will see applications that consume or exhaust these funds by the end of June. So it's important to focus on what it takes to get your application in before the end of June. It is not first come, first serve. It will be prioritized based on the details of your application, your income, and other elements such as if you have current legal actions against you. But let me review some of the key features. So the eligibility for this is that you have had and experienced in your household COVID-19 related financial hardship. You can document that with statements. It does not have to be fully documented with third-party documentation, but you must be able to describe and state the impact on the household from loss of income, from medical impact, from other costs related that have caused you to have a financial hardship. You must have a gross household income that's below the threshold table. and there is a table at the website. It's referred to as 50% of area median income. The area median income is a federal number for the DC region. There's a table that'll tell you what that distribution is. It's for a one-person household, it's 50,000 a year, approximate. For two-person household, it's 57,000 a year, approximate. Three-person household is 64,000. So your income has to be below that threshold. The other eligibility is you must have resided in Montgomery County since at least August of 2021. You must be on a lease or have a formal obligation to pay rent. It can be informal. So I'm sorry, it's informal or formal, but you must be able to document with a landlord statement or other documents that you are the responsible party for the rent. And you have to be behind on your current rent obligation by at least 2 months. These are the minimum standards. Then you must submit documentation to support your income. And there's lists of documents that are eligible for that. It can include your gross household income in 2020 income taxes or 2021, or the previous 30 days of income documented with pay documentation or source of income documentation for the prior 30 days, which times 12 would be below that threshold. Again, it's important to get these documents together, be able to submit application. This is a program, does not require documentation of citizenship or residency. The legal status or social security number is not required. And these can be a little bit complicated. So Renters Alliance and other support organizations, I'll put the list in there, that are working with individuals to help you understand and then to help you document your eligibility. That includes the CASA organization, Latino Economic Development Corporation, and Housing Initiatives Partnership. And I'll put that link in there. We have that at the county's website for renters, which is montgomerycountymd.gov / that's the right word, / renters with an S. And you'll see the names and the contact information for that.
I just uploaded that page for everyone, Frank.
Okay. The assistance that's available is for rent arrearage. It cannot, in previous rounds, we did have forward rent. This round here is only back rent. And the program total for anyone that's participated previously, received any of this COVID rent relief money, the maximum is $12,000 or up to 18 months of rent owed. So we do track that. And if you've received 4,000 previously, you could receive up to 8,000 for current rent arrearages. If you received 12,000 previously, you would not be eligible for this. Additionally, the program can supply utility assistance for households that are below an even lower income threshold. And there's information about that, which is characterized as 30% of the area median income, which for one-person households, close to 30,000, for two-person households, close to 35,000. So for very low income households, this program can provide utility assistance. There are other separate utility assistance programs, but the current COVID rent relief from the county for certain low-income households can add utility past due assistance in addition to the past due rent assistance. The process is going to take some time. Getting all the documents in. We also need a connection to your landlord. The landlord needs to certify the rent owed and certify and confirm that you are a tenant. The landlord can also work with you to complete your application. So in this current round, the landlord can actually completely file the application on behalf of the tenant. They need to talk to you, work with you, and you need to, if you're doing it yourself, you need to engage your landlord and they must update the system. This is all done in an electronic submission system we call a portal, but this will establish an account for yourself. You'll update the information when you submit it, you provide it when you submit it, and you'll update it as needed. When the team starts working with your file, they will be in touch. They'll update you by email or phone, text, however you identify the preferred communication. And the need is for you to respond as you get any contact follow-up to completely answer all the questions, to certify eligibility, and to move forward. As with other rounds, if you're awarded funds, they're actually paid to the landlord. And this is something to explain to your landlord that you are working with this program. Once you get your application in, you connect the landlord to the application. They can see where the application is in process. Unless you give them the documents, they cannot see all your documents. You can ask them to upload them for you. But if you submit, then they simply have to confirm some of the basic information about your tenancy. But that will help them understand that you're in process, and you can help them understand what you believe you're eligible for, and they can work with you on the timing of that and how to maintain your residency, maintain your tenancy, maintain your house. If they receive money, they will have to discontinue any filing that they have against you for eviction, and to pause for a certain number of days after that, and I'll just get to that in a moment. But the program works to bring you as current as the money allows. It may not be able to bring you completely current. And so if you're not eligible for enough money to bring you current, you need to be working with your landlord on the remaining amounts. So I'll pause here, Matt, just for a lot of information. Let's work to see if we can clarify and answer questions that have come up in the chat.
Yeah, if you do have questions, I would remind everybody the raise hand won't work here. Put your question or your concern in the chat, and we'll try to address it for you. You guys, have you seen anything? I've been tracking a little bit.
There was one question earlier just related to the 10-day notice, and that actually asked if that could be sent before rent was late on the 10th. And I think the short answer to that is if it's that 10-day notice that you mentioned, Matt, then yes, as soon as it's after the 1st, those can appear. But then I think that would be rectified before the actual court started if the payment was made before.
Well, I think the law is specifically that they have to give you at least 10 days notice and give you that notice, the court notice, the notice of summary ejectment, which is a very scary form, and it's very confusing to people. People believe that you have 10 days to move out. And that's not what it means. What it means is that the landlord intends to file in court to have you evicted in at least 10 days. So that's the first thing. I think also someone asked a similar question, David, that can the landlord threaten to have you evicted before that? Yes, they can do all kinds of threats. They can send you a letter that you have to be out tomorrow. They can have their lawyer send you a letter saying any number of things. But you should know that in order to be evicted, one has to take you to court. There has to be a judgment against you. And the process then goes to the sheriff's office. No landlord can evict you, him or herself. That is illegal. If a landlord changes your locks or goes into your apartment to move out your furniture or any of those things without a sheriff present and without a court order, that is against the law. And we usually recommend that you call the police because basically they're trespassing. That's the only ones I saw. Anything else?
We had another question about the utility programs that are available, and I don't know if you want to touch, Matt, on something.
Not I. Frank would be the expert on this. Frank, I know the COVID rent relief program includes now some utility assistance.
The COVID rent relief program includes some utility assistance. Access to other utility programs, I'm going to recommend that you call the 311 and ask for someone to get back to you on the utility assistance programs. The state will be ramping up some additional resources shortly. The county has a very limited other sources for that. But we do have a process through Department of Health and Human Services to connect people with existing state resources and some of the county resources. But the most important thing is to get connected and to call 311 and ask for utility assistance.
Noted. Anything else, gang?
I think that covers it.
Yeah, let me just make sure.
I see one thing in the chat, someone offering if there's flyers available to get those to fellow residents at the COVID rent relief webpage, and I've put the link in there, but you can also just search Montgomery County MD COVID rent relief. There is a posting of flyers in 7 languages. So it's a 1-page flyer that you can print out, and you can do it in the 7 languages supported by the county. But if you have further questions, you can contact the main phone number there for Housing Stabilization Services if you have a need for additional information.
A couple other things that popped in that I saw. One is, it is my understanding, Frank, correct me if I'm wrong, but what you don't want to do is if you're in arrears and you're about ready and you've applied for rent relief, you don't want to move until that rent relief has been processed. If you do move, you'll no longer be eligible for the rent relief. Is that correct, Frank?
That's correct. We can only pay for existing residency, existing tenancy arrearage.
The purpose is to keep you in your home. So if you move,
Right.
you lose that ability, and some of that debt, 3, 5, 10 more thousands of dollars will follow you. So be very careful about choosing to move before you get that relief. Someone also asked about the additional utility money. So as the county, the COVID rent relief program will also include some measure of utility assistance. And as Mr. Demaray said, you can check with 311 for more details, and we'll put out that information in our next newsletter. But the state will also have upwards of $70 million available. Sounds like a lot, but there's a lot of people in the state of Maryland. So, don't get dollar signs for eyes, but it will be available. And it will be available as of July 1st. And we will be putting out information with more detail about that. We just had a meeting about it today with the state and with the Delegate Lorig Charkoudian, who's been working very hard to make sure that that program is available to as many people as possible and as accessible to as many people as possible. So those are 2 issues that came up. Anything else?
Matt, I'm looking at this young lady who is saying it states in her lease that she can't go to school if she lives in Montgomery Arms. I've never heard of anything like that.
I've never heard of anything like that too. I don't know any landlord or property manager who can tell you where you can go or can't go when you step out of your apartment. We did have one senior building that put in their newsletter that if you fell asleep in the community chairs, you were going to be evicted. They must have had their hands full. I don't know what happened there either. But I don't think that sounds right. But if you think they're serious, for God's sake, send us that communication and that part of the lease, and we will deal with that. It could, Montgomery Arms doesn't sound, I don't think that's a senior restricted building or some other kind of building that would have restrictions or not. But I certainly, being a student, wouldn't apply to any of that. So
Yeah.
I don't get it. Okay, well, Frank, there's more going on with the county than just the COVID rent relief program. Many tenants have issues with code enforcement and the quality of maintenance in their building, and they also have issues with disputes with their their landlords. And perhaps you could give us an overview again of the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs Services and code enforcement.
All right, let me do one closure. It was, I believe, referenced, but I just want to be clear. COVID rent relief is back rent. If you are facing eviction, if you have a judgment against you, and you are facing eviction, or you have a red and white notice and the sheriff has put you on notice that they are going to enforce eviction, it's important to call 311 and ask for housing stabilization services. So this gets mentioned many times, but the county has emergency resources. They're not $12,000, but the focus would be to support any household facing loss of their housing to be able to relocate. In some cases, the assistance can help work with the landlord to maintain the current housing. But while you're in process applying for the longer amounts, bigger amounts, back rent, and you are facing imminent loss of your housing, please call 311 and take advantage of housing stabilization services. And I'll put that link in there. Just touching on other topics. Matt spoke to the change in the county's rent cap that was in place for 2 years, expired May the 15th. It's confusing because the county has had this in place for 2 years. Referenced an index that limited your rent increases on any increased notice to a specific index that was called the voluntary rent guideline. And so through May the 15th, if you had a notice of rent increase, it was capped at that index number, which most recently was 0.4% from February through May. On May 16, there is no cap on rent increases. The county publishes this voluntary rent guideline as a reference. It's an area-wide average of rent increases in the prior calendar year. It was only 0.4%, less than 0.5% in the prior year region-wide. But right now, there are no caps. Matt spoke earlier to reports of significant increases being notices being provided with 90 days notice. That puts it out to September. You have the opportunity to work with your landlord, negotiate, see if they'll work with you to stretch it out over time or work with your ability to pay. But from a legal perspective, that is this current law. And it's where we were before April of 2020. The county did not have any county-wide maximums or restrictions on rent increases. We did for 2 years. The Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs is a division of Department of Housing Community Affairs, where I'm the deputy director. We have investigators that will work with you. If you call on a complaint that you believe your rent or notices or other elements of your lease enforcement or actions of the landlord are not allowed under landlord tenant law, you can file a complaint. We have a very thorough and I believe fairly user and consumer friendly document that summarizes all of the requirements of landlord tenant law. It's called the Landlord Tenant Handbook. It's there for tenants and landlords to understand their responsibilities and the requirements of the law. With respect to the current rent increase environment, providing 90 days notice required. There's a certain form of notice required. On a renewal, the landlord must offer you a 2-year option or a statement as to why they can't or will not offer a 2-year renewal. And they must reference the percentage increase that they're proposing in your new rent. They will include the voluntary rent guideline percentage as a reference, but it is not a cap. It has no enforcement. But you do have the rights to these kinds of notices. And you also have structures that if the landlord is giving you notice to vacate or taking action against you to take it to court, there are a series of things that they must do. We talked about the 10-day notice that is being provided in this, very scary wording. But on that 10-day notice, it spells out that that's simply the landlord giving you the notice that if you have not paid your rent on the day it was due, they have the right to file an action. On the back of that is a list of legal resources. This is another component the county is supporting. This document that we're talking about, the 10-day notice, is a state required document. It lists legal resources, free legal assistance available to any tenant with concerns about legal actions against them. At the county's website that I've posted there, but it's the montgomerycountymd.gov/renters, we list the contact numbers for Maryland Legal Aid Bureau and for the Homeless Persons Representation Project, who, they represent tenants. They are not solely representing homeless persons. And there are additional resources from the CASA organization. For those that are working with the CASA organization, they have legal support. And in the courthouse, the courts maintain a help center. You can get information by calling the court help center numbers that we have at our website, or if you show up at court, you will be able to find someone there. They've had staffing questions on, and especially with the courts open and closed, but you do have support, legal representation support and legal advice support. The help center can't represent, the others can. It's important to take advantage of these, but the county's Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs is available to answer questions. Call 311, describe what your needs are. It will get referred to the Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs, to an investigator who will follow up. This includes, every element of your lease, including, paying back your security deposit when you leave, how the rent's being charged, what's included in the rent changes and how they're done, utility inclusions in your rent and changes to that. And again, this landlord tenant handbook, and I'll try and get that link posted in there online.
We posted it twice.
Right. It's available in multiple languages. So it's very important to understand all those and then to use the county's resources to better understand it and then work with your landlord. A lot of times it's really just not, fully understood by both parties, the landlord and the tenant, what the responsibilities, what the limitations are.
Frank, I want to add something about you mentioned the rent cap expiring and that people are now seeing significant rent increases. And it's true, there's no rent stabilization anywhere in the state of Maryland with the exception of Tacoma Park. But it is our understanding from the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs that they begin to take a dim view of an increase of rent more than 10%. And that it might be considered under certain circumstances, maybe all circumstances, that a excessive increase that high could be considered a constructive eviction, which would be a violation of the law and could be adjudicated and enforced by DHCA. Is that your understanding?
That is an application of the constructive eviction that is, historically based on where rents had been, and we're in a different period. So unfortunately, the 10% number was, it was many multiples of kind of average rent increases. We're in a period where, we just don't know what the average rent increase is going to be. For reference, the city of Tacoma Park has rent stabilization. Their rent increase maximum is 7.3% under the rent stabilization index to the consumer price index. So staying with this question, is it something that's actionable? If a rent increase is considered to be excessive, it is. We can take the calls and we'll investigate and we'll communicate with the landlord on the situation. The definition of what is constructive eviction, what is a excessive rent, is a difficult number to deal with. It's very difficult for the tenants to be paying these kind of increases, but in an inflationary period that we're experiencing right now, I can't tell you there's a number that represents something that's a threshold. 19-20% are very, very high. And it does take investigation and figuring out what's going on and helping the parties to, if possible, to find.
I'd love to take a deeper dive into what we can consider a constructive eviction at some point, because one of the other concerns we've heard is that, all right, let's say if people are getting 10 and 20 and 30%, which of course are in fact extremely excessive. But if you're a senior citizen on a fixed income, and now all of a sudden your normal rent increases were 2% or so a year, but now you're seeing 5%, well, within 3 years, you're going to be out of your home. You're not going to be able to afford it. Does that constitute a constructive eviction? So maybe down the road, we might dive into what it is and under what circumstances a constructive eviction complaint ought to be filed.
Frank,
Yes.
one of the, let me get on, one of our listeners would like to know an average amount of days. Once they complete the application, do you know about how long it would take to let them know or for the application to be processed?
Okay.
For
the
rent relief
COVID
or for
Yes.
COVID
complaint?
rent relief, yeah.
Yes. for the
COVID rent relief processing, we cannot give a date. And some of it's going to be, we will be working with the very low income applications on a priority basis. We'll be focusing on those who are facing legal action on a priority basis. We also fully expect that we will have an overwhelming number of applications. So prior rounds, there were applications that took 3, 4, 5 months. And so the short answer is it's going to take well more than a month. It's going to probably, multiple months are, very feasible. We've adjusted the system. We've tried to simplify it. We've improved the technology. We went and upgraded our technology to better support. And we're hoping that all of this will improve the timeline. But we firmly believe we're going to see an overwhelming number of applications. We have a very large number of staff committed to this. The team has been held together at the level we had last year, different people in some cases, but we have a very large team with experience. But it did take many, many months. And the system will update status received. It'll update when it's, in being reviewed, when a case manager is assigned to it. So you'll be able to monitor your application for progress, but you will go for long periods not seeing any progress for most applications. It's just a fact of the amount of information that has to be received, processed, and the overwhelming amount of applications that we believe we'll have. But the most important thing is to get that application in, get it in June, get it in as soon as you can, and then to respond as any follow-up occurs.
Frank, do we got a status check on, now that you brought it up, how many applications have gone in so far? Did they say that today?
I don't have an application count. We're going to remain open for the full 45 days. No money's going out the door, I'll tell you that. But it's a process that, as we can, we'll update the, number of applications and where we stand on monies going out the door. But it will take longer to get the money out the door than the 45 days. You're not going to see, the money run out before the end of 45 days, but there'll be applications in process that we expect will fully employ all the money. So it's not a metric that is available at this time.
Here's a great question, which I always love from Mr. or Ms. Tompkins. Has anybody tried to implement rent stabilization? Well, understand two things. One is that just cause eviction law, that is the eviction law itself, is a statewide law, and it has to be enacted at the state level in order for that to happen. Rent control or rent stabilization can be enacted locally. The county council, for as long as we've been around, we were established in 2010, has not supported rent stabilization. A couple council members have been for it. The county council member, Mark Elrich, who is now the county executive, is a supporter of rent stabilization. And he is looking at, as we mentioned earlier in the discussion, at proposing some sort of anti-rent gouging measure. We don't know what the nature of that is yet, the details of it, And Deputy Director Frank Demeray and I discussed earlier, we don't know, so we don't want to get into what it might be without knowing. But we will obviously bring it to you as soon as we have more details. But it is certainly something that the Renters Alliance supports. And let me say something about rent stabilization in general. Obviously, the landlords don't like it, and there are many forms of it. We believe in a form similar to what exists in Tacoma Park, a flexible kind of rent stabilization, one that has, obviously a rent cap of as high as it could go, one that balances the interests of a landlord legitimately trying to make a reasonable rate of return on his or her property, as well as can maintain their overhead expenses and keep up with them. So we don't have any issue with that. We also understand that new investments in the new properties, newly built apartment buildings have greater expenses than those that have been around for a long time. And so a rent stabilization law like Tacoma Park has a number of flexible provisions. So it provides renters with predictability in their rents and some stabilization in their rents, but also provides landlords the opportunity to invest if they can demonstrate that they need to raise rents beyond the rent stabilization levels. But it puts some kind of rational process into rents as opposed to the Wild West, which we're seeing at many commercial properties of whatever the market will bear without any responsibility for keeping rents reasonable for long-term renters who want to be stable in their communities and in their homes. So I think that answers the question about someone asked, has anybody been trying? We've been trying since we were formed, and we will continue to try with your help. What else, Frank?
I want to touch on the other things that we do here at DHC, including the code enforcement. So I've seen questions here on safety and security. Again, if you have a concern that there's elements of your property, either management, maintenance, that are in violation of the housing code, this would be inside your unit, in common areas, especially if they are health and safety related. You need to work first with your landlord. The key is to get this resolved, to request that it be resolved. If it's not being resolved, we have a process. Again, it's the 311 and filing a complaint. You call 311, say you have a housing code complaint. Any details you can share in that report are helpful. You can also go online, and I'm going to say we also have a very helpful housing code handbook that provides the outline of code requirements. And you can file a complaint against any of those code requirements. We'll investigate. We'll work with the landlord to remedy if we find violations. We're also, in the process of looking at and inspecting all of the properties in the county on a scheduled basis. Certain properties are getting very deep reviews because of the number of complaints and findings against them. And then there's those properties that have had very few complaints. They're done on a less frequent basis. But we do have a regime of regular inspection of all of our properties. But we are available, and the 311 will get an inspector connected to the issue. It will be done on a priority basis, so health and safety issues get prioritized. But again, we're available to follow up on any of those questions.
I see something, this comes up quite a bit, and it really, it's confusing for renters. The fire alarm systems in buildings are an issue for the fire marshal. You can, I believe you can contact code, Frank, on this, but I believe maintaining a properly working fire alarm system in the building is something that I think is enforced by the fire marshal. Is that right, Frank?
The fire code inspections that cover sprinklers and fire alarm systems, that's correct.
Right.
calling
And I know some of
311,
these buildings
reporting
have
it.
these alarms
Yeah.
going off all the time, and it's unconscionable. They go off at 2 o'clock in the morning, and it's because of a broken system often, though sometimes we also see mischief going on with kids pulling the fire alarm. But most of the time it's because the system is not working properly. And if that's happening a lot in your building, I would suggest you can contact us. We'll help you get in touch with the fire marshal, but that's usually the best way to do it. What else do we have, guys? Anything?
You had a specific follow-up on who on the council maybe the current council supports rent stabilization. I think it was maybe what they're asking, but the specific members.
Well, let me give a general response to that. First of all, I believe 8 of the 9 council members, with the exception of Council Member Friedson, supported the emergency rent stabilization program over the last couple of years. So that would be the majority, with the exception of Andrew Friedson from Bethesda. In terms of long-term rent stabilization, the supports it the way the Renters Alliance has supported it. The only council members that I know of that have come forward publicly that way are Council Member Will Jawando, and I'm not sure about the others. And obviously, County Executive Elridge has stated publicly many times that he supports a rent stabilization program. He was principally behind the establishment of Tacoma Park's rent stabilization programs. But the culture of the council, the culture of political policy in this area is evolving. When we started this 10 years ago, people laughed at the idea of actually passing any legislation that would protect renters. And yet 4 years into it, with the help of County Council Member Elridge then at the time, and after the Tenants Work Group report, which we put out in 2010, we passed the first renter protection legislation. It was very modest, but it signified that there was a growing recognition by the council that renters were a growing population in this county, going from 23% approximately to nearly 40% now, and still growing. And that the nature of those demographics are changing, with more and more renters participating in the political process and being active in every part of county life. And any politician worth his or her salt knows to pay attention to that. Add to that, the COVID pandemic has brought many issues that renters are facing, not just in our region, but across the country, into stark relief. So that we are seeing the struggle to maintain affordable housing become critical. We're seeing the difficulty of working families and low-income families who are always struggling to pay rent put in crisis. So the environment for progressive laws that protect renters may be improving. And so I wouldn't do just a head count with the council. I'd also consider that we have an election upcoming, and that we have an environment where renter policy issues, housing policy issues have become part of the public discussion more than I've seen in my lifetime.
Then we had a question a while back. I just wanted to make sure we didn't fall through the crack, which was about, you laid out the timeline about, court, if you get called into court, if you then receive a judgment, filing for a writ of restitution by the landlord. Someone asked if then, and then the sheriff, if that all plays out after the 60-day notice to vacate. And I just wanted to clarify that, yes, that what the court process that got laid out would be after the time that if someone's asking about a notice to vacate, that was sent 60 days before, after that 60 days.
Well, let's clarify the different types of approaches to eviction. There's one that everybody thinks is most common, but it's not. But that's if you, for breach of lease. That is, you are violating the rules of your lease and of your community. and you're endangering others, or you're damaging property, or some other behavioral issue that the landlord says you can't live here anymore, and I'm going to evict you for breaching the lease, breaking the rules of the lease or of the rules of the community that any judge would say is substantial enough to remove you from your home. That is not a common form of eviction, but it is one of them. The most common form of eviction is for failure to pay rent. So if you are late, which is after the first of the month, a landlord, as Mr. Desmarais said, could file for eviction. Now, he or she has to give you a 10-day notice of summary ejectment, but they could also just say, hey, look, you're late, in a letter. They could have the lawyer send you a letter. They could wait a month. They could wait 2 months before they start threatening you. But when they decide to file in court, they have to give you a 10-day notice of summary ejectment. That's most commonly for failure to pay rent. And that can be cured in a number of ways, usually the best way, paying off your rent. The other issue is for tenant holding over. So that goes to the 60 days. If the landlord decides not to renew your lease, he or she has to give you 60 days notice before the end of your lease that they're not going to renew. If you stay 1 day past the end of your lease, you are now called tenant holding over. And on that day, they can file for eviction for tenant holding over. And unfortunately, in court, there's very little defense against it. The landlord in the state of Maryland, even though we're fighting this, has the ability to reclaim their possession of their apartment as long as they gave you the proper notice, with a narrow exception. If you can prove, mind you, not he said, she said, but usually a good document or some pattern of provable behavior that the landlord is retaliating against you, then there may be a case to protect your home against that kind of eviction. And usually under those circumstances, you will need a lawyer. That's the three. And the fourth one is for, David, help me. It's for squatting. What do we call that? Wrongful detainer. If you're living in a place where you're not supposed to be in the first place, you're a guest in somebody's house and you won't leave, or you're squatting, then you can be evicted for what's called wrongful detainer. And that's fairly rare, but it does happen as well. So those are the four ways you can be evicted. And I believe the question that David referred to was for tenant holding over.
It sounded like yes. Thank you. Then we had two that seemed kind of connected that just came through, which is how long does it take the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs to investigate and take action on complaints on average? And then there was just a general question, how would you report irregular practices of landlords? I didn't know if that was maybe the complaint that we're asking about here.
Frank?
So a 311 call will get assigned the day it comes in or within 24 hours. The numbers of calls come in are substantial. Efforts are made to prioritize based on the characterization that comes in with it. In terms of resolution, and an investigator will be responding. So there's a time frame of days to potentially to get back to the complainant. Investigation and then working to resolution, again, is going to be a function of both the overall number and the different requests and the nature of the complaint. Some take a lot longer to investigate, determine all the facts, work with the parties. Every effort's made to resolve things without having to take it through a formal adjudication. So there's a series of days. It all matters on the nature of the complaint. But the answer is you will get contacted. The process will begin, and then it can be better explained at a case-by-case level.
I just put in response to a question in the chat, how do you do a background check on a property? The county does have a tool called e-properties. I put the link in the system. It's a little temperamental. It's got two search mechanisms. One is by property name and the other is by address. Sometimes the investigators or those people putting in the information will call a property by a shorter name. So for example, if you live at Colesville Towers, they might put in just the address of Colesville Towers, but not Colesville Towers. So you might have to play with a little bit to find the property that you want to look into. But when you find it, you will see that there is a history of Office of Landlord and Tenant complaints and the code enforcement complaints. And you will find often that you're not alone. If you've got a complaint about bed bugs or vermin or issues with the property management, you'll find that there are others who have similar complaints. And you'll also find that, and again, Frank, correct me if I'm wrong, but every property in the county by law, I think, has to be inspected once every 3 years. That inspection may be 10%, maybe 25%, maybe 50%. If it's a troubled property or one that has a number of complaints, they may choose to do a 100% inspection. And I believe County Executive Elrich put in place by law a program of troubled properties. So these properties that have chronic problems will be inspected more frequently and more expansively. Frank, do you want to expand on my expansiveness?
No, I think that's the fundamentals.
But anyway, so that's a search tool. And of course, the other tools are looking on apartments.com and Yelp and other places to see what's going on. Take that with a grain of salt. Obviously, the loudest and most temperamental tenants have the biggest complaints. But if I'm going to spend, $2,000 a month for my home, I think it's worth taking a look to see what kind of place you're moving into. Or if you're having difficulties in your apartment community, to find out if it's, something anecdotal or is this a pattern that requires a little bit more effort with your neighbors. And maybe with the help of the Renters Alliance, and maybe in collaboration with our partners or with the county. So by all means, do your research. What else do we got? David, Malek, Pat?
I just want to drop in one clarification. I like to try and just remind people that the cities of Gaithersburg, Rockville, and Tacoma Park have their own offices of landlord-tenant affairs, and I think code complaints. We just had a question: how do you file a complaint against a management company? And so it would be with filing it with the office that Matt mentioned with the county, unless you live in the city limits of one of those three.
Yes, and I'm going to give quick homework to one of you three. Could you all put those 3 links in the chat? Very good point, David. And I should have mentioned it myself. We had a town hall some weeks ago with the various housing departments from the municipalities. It is a common confusion and a frustration by many tenants. If you don't live outside of these 3 municipalities, Tacoma Park, Rockville, or Gaithersburg, you can't, many of the county laws won't apply to you and county services won't apply to you. COVID rent relief will, however, apply to you, so don't worry about that. But enforcement of code, enforcement of landlord tenant issues, if you live in those 3 municipalities, you have to work through those departments. And otherwise you can work through the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs for the county. Anything else?
I don't know if you want to take a stab at it. How often do you see retaliation against renters trying to form tenant associations?
Well, I don't give a smarmy answer, but too often. It does happen. And that's why if you're in a vulnerable situation, there are ways to go about making complaints. We often provide a buffer for that. If you are concerned about retaliation, the Renters Alliance can come and deal with it for you and see whether or not there's a pattern. We find that when a property manager or landlord is acting inappropriately or in a retaliatory or abusive fashion, it's usually not with one person, it's usually with many. We like to go into the entire complex and invite everybody in the community to let us know what's going on. And we are not afraid to speak to property managers and landlords about what they should be doing and what they should not be doing. So we can help there, but unfortunately, it does happen. And we urge you, as always, you're in a business relationship with your landlord or property manager. These are not your friends. They may be friendly, but they're not your friends. It's a business relationship. And if you have complaints or concerns, make sure that it's in writing. And if there are agreements that they say they're going to give you this, or they say they're going to make this repair, or they say they're going to lower your rent or raise your rent, make sure that it's memorialized some way in writing, because we have seen many times the promises that were made or agreements that were made in verbally that seem to be forgotten all of a sudden when things get more difficult. What else do we got?
I just had a note that I was going to tack on to the e-property discussion. Licensing is actually, I think, also searchable there. And while that law didn't pass, that would make require licenses for all types of court cases, I think it does come into play in some, at least. So that's another thing you can search on e-property if you type it in right, like you mentioned.
Okay. As far as investigating the business dealings of property owners and companies, we would love to, but it's a very difficult process. David, you want to say anything about your own research on this and how much fun it is?
Yeah, it's a real emotional roller coaster and and time drain. No, but I do see someone mentioning in the chat that Bridge here, and that happens to be my management company too here in Gaithersburg. It was Harbor before. I noticed someone at Crossings where I visited mentioned a management change, and so I want to just acknowledge that this is happening, and it's hard to even get a handle on. But we do see what I call kind of a playbook of new management coming in and thinking they can just do sweeping changes that we know they're not allowed to do in the middle of a lease. So just know we do want to hear about it, and I think that also talking to each other across properties when we have the similar management company is also something we can be doing as tenants, and we're certainly open to that, and I'm definitely open to those discussions.
Yeah, also a reminder, this is being broadcast live on YouTube, so you can watch it again and again if you'd like to, with all of our fabulous faces. Let's see, should we get notice of management changes? That would be nice. They don't have to, but they should. And we are seeing a lot of turnover. And another spoiler alert is that the Renters Alliance is pushing very hard with hopefully the support of the county executive to require that landlords and property managers who operate in Montgomery County be trained and certified in order to operate in Montgomery County. We see so much turnover of property managers and that absolutely have no idea what the law is, much less best practices in managing an apartment community. And we think if you have to get a license to drive a car, you ought to actually know what you're doing to manage hundreds of families in some of these properties, in some cases over 1,000 families. They need to know how to keep their books. They need to know what the law is. They need to know best practices of maintaining a healthy and within code environment, how to do maintenance and keep track of things. And we find many of them have no idea. So we think that should be something that's required. So I saw that in there, and that's something that we're working on. If somebody said SS, I'm thinking they mean Silver Spring. Okay, I think we are winding up. Any last questions? Now would be the time.
So if we have someone who's wanting to know how to distribute the buttons that Rebecca Reeve donated to us, We have them in-house now, right? So should they just send an email to info@Renters Alliance?
Say again?
If residents want to know how they can distribute buttons at their
Oh.
front desk,
Oh,
they can just send a request to info@rentersalliance.org.
absolutely.
Yep.
We've got a good chunk of them. We don't have
Drop 'em
millions, but we have quite a few. And if you'd like to have, here's the deal, we would love for you to want to have a community meeting where we could come and distribute buttons there. But if you have a request for buttons, let us know at info@rentersalliance.org, name and address, and we'll get them to you. So I think that's it. I know it's it for me. I've had it. Let's see. Everybody's thanking us, so I think I'm going to get out of here while we can. First of all, let me just say thank you all to who are listening. Something that Frank Demaray says all the time, I'll repeat it. We appreciate you all being here, but what's really important is that you share the information that you hear tonight with your friends and neighbors so that we get a larger understanding of the laws and the services in Montgomery County to the renter community at large. So you all who are here tonight are our activists, you're our eyes and ears, and we ask you, please spread the news. We will have our next Renter Town Hall on June 22nd. It's going to be focused primarily on issues that senior renters face, but we'll also have information about these other issues and updates on the COVID rent relief program as always, and an opportunity to address any specific concerns. I know that our Deputy Director of Housing is doing the man with two brains. He's got another meeting that he's also working on right now. And so he's left to do that, but I want to thank Frank Demaray for joining us. My staff, as always, David Mullins, Malek Demir, and Pat Beckham. If you have questions or concerns, email us at info@rentersalliance.org. Thank you,
Vote.
everybody.
Vote,
And-
vote.
What? And vote. Don't forget.
Vote.
So thanks, everybody, and good night.
Good night.